The Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy is going to wrap up in a few years once Part 3 releases, but thanks to a ton of new information from Square due to the recently released Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Ultimania in Japan, more details are being revealed every day that sheds new light on not only key moments of Rebirth, but also what's to come in Part 3. Just like the previous video, we are going to split this one into two distinct parts, with Part 1 focusing on new developments revealed for FF7 Remake Part 3, with the last section discussing elements of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's ending, so that will obviously contain spoilers. No spoilers going ahead when discussing the Part 3 news, other than some location, boss, and summon spoilers for the original game. So with that said, equip your strongest materia and buckle up as we take the high wind to examine all the new developments revealed for FF7 Remake Part 3. Before we touch down and icicle in, definitely check out my giveaway of Stellar Blade and Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance if you'd like a chance to win these games for free, paid for by yours truly. Details for the giveaways are linked in the description. Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 is going to undoubtedly be the biggest of the Remake trilogy, with new locations to discover, new vehicles to operate, and with a story that sees us returning to many of the locations we previously visited in Rebirth and Remake's Midgar. Thanks to Audrey at Itaikimochi on Twitter and to Shinra Archaeology Department for translating the contents of the FF7 Rebirth Ultimania, we have an updated look at what the developers are hoping to achieve with Part 3. With battle director Teruki Endo mentioning that he wants Part 3 to give players even more freedom to explore the world. While Rebirth gave us a large world to explore on foot with mainly chocobos and a buggy to explore, Endo hopes to give players more options as to how they get to their desired destination in Part 3. We know from previous statements from game director Naoki Hamaguchi that high-wind traversal is a key element the team is trying to get right for Part 3, but that also other vehicles and different breeds of chocobos will be present in Part 3 as well, given the trajectory of the original game, of which we will get into in a minute. So perhaps Endo's comments suggest a greater diversity in ways in which we can traverse these maps with a variety of travel methods at our disposal. Audrey brings up the thought if Part 3 would mimic the format of a completely open world game like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but like some Final Fantasy VII fans have mentioned, I think Part 3 may reflect more closely Tears of the Kingdom, with its sky, land, and underworld areas being fully explorable. For Part 3, the high wind represents the sky, the land represents the variety of regions we can explore along the planet's surface, and the underwater areas represent an explorable expanse we can explore with the submarine, all of which will be featured in Part 3. First, with the high wind, creative director Tetsuya Nomura remarks that the single biggest obstacle posed by Part 3 is implementing the airship, and more specifically, how and where to land the aircraft. Nomura further remarks that he fears that landing such a massive aircraft in the world may, quote, limit how freely the vehicle can be used, and that this has been an issue that the development team has been struggling with for a while. With the graphical scale of these remakes featuring much more varied and realistic landscapes over their original counterpart, simply landing the airship wherever has provided the team many challenges. Nomura, however, states that he's confident the team will rise to the occasion and implement a great system for the high-wind traversal. So, if I were part of the development staff, I would address this issue by just having the party members rope down from the high wind, as this eliminates the need to feature flat areas for the high wind to appropriately rest. We see the high wind is more than capable of hovering closely to surfaces, so this could be a very simple way to allow for smooth disembarking in most cases. Let me know your thoughts on how you would handle the high wind traversal and how you would be able to land it in the comments, but given how impressive the tiny Bronco was able to handle the waters of Rebirth, I'm sure the team will blow us away with the high wind and the views provided from this behemoth of an airship. Just imagine exploring this thing in all of its various rooms like the OG while thousands of feet above the expanse below you. Can't freaking wait. Speaking of awesome, this thing tastes like summer. Yep. Gamer Supps raw meat tub, offered with or without caffeine, tastes like those watermelon Jolly Ranchers we all used to eat back in middle school. Except, this contains all the vitamins and energy you'd usually get from an energy drink, but without any sugar and at less than 1 calorie. Use the code FUNMYLIFE at checkout to receive 10% off your order. Your support goes a long way in making this channel run afloat, so I appreciate your support, and your taste buds will thank you all the more. Nomura later states 3 things in the Ultimania about the elements of Part 3's world, with airship traversal, more importantly, how and where to land it, how to portray the awakened weapons roaming the world, and finally how to traverse the ocean floor. These are all major components that make the latter half of the OG FF7 so memorable, and all this will be fully explored in Part 3, which will give greater variety to the traversal we've seen introduced from Rebirth, in addition to new regions we can now venture to thanks to these new modes of travel. Truly exciting stuff going on here with Part 3, and I can't wait to see how it all shapes up in the final release. In addition to all this, Hamaguchi remarks that there are still 4 more summons from the original game that have not been included in the FF7 Remake project yet, stating whether the team can live up to the lofty expectations fans likely have for Knights of the Round summon. Knights of the Round is going to be absolutely legendary in Part 3, considering how ridiculously awesome it is in the OG, so I can't freaking wait to see how they implement the 13 legendary knights here in Part 3. I'm definitely thinking they're going to tie this legendary summon to the 3rd game's proto-relic questline, as I believe there will be 13 regions to explore, each featuring a knight required to form an entrance to the summon materia hidden on Round Island. And if you are curious about which regions I think these 13 will be, go watch this video linked in the description and at the end of this video to find out. As for which summons we have yet to obtain from the OG, outside of Knights of the Round, we have Hades, Bahamut Zero, and Typhon. Now, out of all these summons, which one are you most looking forward to seeing in Part 3? I'm most excited to see how Knights of the Round will be implemented here, along with its minutes-long summoning animation in Part 3. While these are just 4 summons, we can expect more to enter the game, just as both Remake and Rebirth featured summons that were not present in the original Final Fantasy VII. Before we head into Rebirth story discussions from the development team, Hamaguchi states that should Part 3 adhere to the OG game in terms of events, then Part 3 will pick up by having the party first visit Icicle Inn and the Great Glacier. What follows is the awakening of the weapons, like Emerald, Ruby, Diamond, Sapphire, etc., and then we'll get the airship and so on. Right now, Hamaguchi is struggling how to best kick off the events of Part 3, and this segues into a greater discussion of Rebirth as a whole, along with its late game and ending spoilers. So for those who have yet to finish Rebirth and don't want to be spoiled, definitely go ahead and come back to this video when you're done with the game so that you can more properly enjoy the rest of this video. So, at the end of Rebirth, we realize that, damn, we just skipped over Rocket Town as if it never existed. Well, in Part 3, we know that Rocket Town is very much going to be part of Remake Part 3, thanks to IGN's interview with the Rebirth dev team. So perhaps with the ending of Rebirth showcasing the tiny Bronco flying off into the distance, that the crew are either en route to the Northern Crater, as Cloud suggests in the ending, or perhaps the crew will take a detour to Rocket Town, to better set up Sid as a playable character now that he will be fully integrated into the battle party in the final game. I can honestly see it going either way, but if I could have it my way, it would be nice to be able to head to Rocket Town first so that we can get more Sid exposition to properly set him up. In addition to that, with the geography of the Rocket Town region sporting landscapes very similar to that of the grasslands introduced in Rebirth, it could be a good tutorial-like section before heading into the Great Glacier region, where we have a drastically different region to explore from the rest, with the introduction of massive mountains with snow-covered settlements and snowboarding minigames. Just my thoughts, but let me know where you think Part 3 will start off in the comments. With the events of Rebirth having ended at the Forgotten Capital, it is interesting that, prior to settling on that location to cap off the second game in the trilogy, that story writer Kazushige Nojima, as reported by Shinra Archaeology Department on Twitter, stated that there was a period where he did not want the game to end at the Forgotten Capital, and instead wanted the second game to end at the Gungaga Mako reactor after Tifa fell into the lifestream. He wanted this to happen as a way to draw the story along, to have players be even more curious as to what fate may befall Aerith, as her fate would have otherwise been unanswered should they have left off at the Gungaga reactor. Nojima thought it would be a fresh hook to introduce uncertainty about Tifa's fate at the Gungaga reactor to serve as the cliffhanger, but for the sake of splitting this remake series into fewer parts, this plan was thankfully changed. I can't imagine how many more games this would have been split into had this initial concept been the one they decided on, but thankfully, we got confirmation in 2022 that there would only be 3 games in the Remake trilogy, as the second game, Rebirth, would end at the Forgotten Capital. And what an ending we got! We've got a bit more to go, so if you're enjoying this content so far, please go ahead and omni-slash that like button, and hit subscribe if you're loving the content. Now, here in this video, we have a lot to go over regarding the ending, and I chose not to insert my own theories as to what actually happened here, as I don't want to tell you all what to think with an ending that was purposefully created to generate intrigue for the final chapter of the game. With that out of the way, Nomura and team have a lot to add to the discussion of Rebirth's ending to generate further discourse as we await the third and final game. Nomura-san said some very interesting things late last year when talking about the concept of life and death in the world of Final Fantasy VII, and how it would be portrayed in Rebirth, with him stating that life was the central theme surrounding the original game. Now, fans are analyzing this now months-old statement. When discussing the concept of death for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Nomura stated, quote, "Prior to Final Fantasy VII, there have been other titles where characters have experienced tragedy, but many of them have come back or been revived in some way, but I believe that loss is something that happens unexpectedly, and it's not something so dramatic or drawn out, but is something in which a person that you have just conversed with is suddenly gone and never to come back. I believe that the person who dies should not return in this title, and this is what we did with the original." Upon finishing Rebirth, it is quite clear why there is so much discourse regarding the ending of the game, and interpretations of Aerith's fate are dominating the headlines, as we will finally get the answers to come 3 years later in Part 3. This interesting quote from Nomura suggests that, just like the original game, Rebirth is handling death as a way of finality, and that those who die should, quote, "not return in this title." As you can imagine, fans are re-examining the statement from Nomura prior to Rebirth's release to try to search for some sort of closure for what we saw transpire with Aerith, hinting that the team may not bring back Aerith in Part 3, or at least in totality, like as a permanent fixture for the main party for Part 3. It's clear that Aerith will have some sort of presence in Part 3, whether she is being treated like Zack was in Rebirth, with short sections of story provided to her being sprinkled throughout the game, but this quote is really stirring the pot quite a bit, seeing as the developers stated, as we previously went over in the last video, that Aerith's fate is unknown. On the same token, Kitase explained that he would like to see everyone have a happy ending, while also tying up all loose ends to the story. All these statements from the developers are just hilarious to me, as they're just having us go in circles, because at the end of the day, we won't truly know what's going on with Aerith until the final game comes out, right? So with that said, what do you make of all this? And do you think Aerith is alive or dead? Do you think she will be part of the main battle party in Part 3? And if so, when? I know a lot of fans are interested in seeing her defy fate and survive whatever happened to her there at the Forgotten Capital, whereas an equally other vocal side is hoping that Aerith remains dead just like the original, as her removal from the game represents a pivotal moment that further highlights the theme of life and death, and further provides something that Cloud will have to come to terms with as he fixes his head in the events to come in Part 3. Further on into the Ultimania, Nomura states that the original FF7 concept they wanted to portray during Aerith's death was, quote, "suddenly losing someone important to you, with Cloud's helplessness in stopping Sephiroth." In Rebirth, the team went further, as they wanted to portray, quote, "not being able to accept the loss of someone important" in that same scene. Nomura continues on by stating that the original game depicted Cloud to be a bystander, as Sephiroth killed Aerith to depict the cruel loss of someone you cherish, but for Rebirth, they wanted to give players a sense of fighting back against destiny and have Cloud make an effort to deflect Sephiroth's attack. What I find here is really poignant, so I'm just going to use direct quotes here with Shinra Archaeology Department's tweet for this follow-up to Nomura's previous statement. However, when you actually lose someone you cherish in the real world, you aren't able to accept it right away. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth strives to depict that inability to accept the loss of someone precious to you. Cloud's psychic interference reflects this state of mind. This is such a powerful passage from the Ultimania because it concisely summarizes Cloud as a character and all the damage that has happened to his mental state from the very start of the game. And I mean the very start, like the OG FF7 and the start of FF7 Remake. as Cloud has been suffering strong episodes of Mako poisoning while under the influence of Genova at key times throughout the narrative. This passage of the Ultimania brings forth the stages of grief, commonly split into 5 different stages, with stage 1 being the stage of denial, which we happen to find Cloud in at the end of Rebirth, as the Ultimania so suggests. The denial stage comes with a rejection of the events that took place as a way to protect the person encountering grief, of which we can definitely correlate to Cloud through his handling of the ending. While the rest of the party is clearly grieving the loss of Aerith, Cloud is not, because he thinks she is perhaps alive due to him seeing his efforts in deflecting Sephiroth's blow come alive before him. He also communicates with Aerith in what appears to be an alternate reality that was created from the deflection of Sephiroth's attack, and the Ultimania brings to light these different realities. Because there is a lot of confusion going on in regards to the ending, with multiple realities confirmed by the way of multiple stamps existing and having Aeriths from other dimensions giving Cloud the white materia, we don't fully know if this is just Cloud in denial or not like the Ultimania suggests, but it makes for a compelling case. The later stages of denial are anger, bargaining, or the what if or if only stage, followed by depression and then finally acceptance. If this truly is the path that Cloud is encountering, then I can't wait to see him go through these in part 3, as the original game very much mimics these stages, and I wouldn't be surprised if part 3 goes down this route, as the Remake trilogy largely adheres to the story of the original game. Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy producer Yoshinori Kitase remarks in the Ultimania that there may be some who expected Cloud breaking the barrier of fate in the remake to also alter what befalls Aerith, but reinforces the concept that the remake project generally adheres to the story of the main game, perhaps alluding to the fact that Cloud very much is going through the denial stage in the stages of grief. Absolutely fascinating stuff, and remember, I'm just the messenger here, so I'm not telling you what or what not to believe, as there are a lot of compelling theories out there, but I just wanted to show you all these statements from the developers. While not giving us much, they do provide additional perspective on how things could be playing out in part 3. Needless to say, Cloud is messed up in the Remake trilogy, even more so than how messed up he was in the OG, so regardless of how this all plays out with Aerith, I can't wait to see how this all gets resolved in the final game. Definitely let me know below your thoughts about these developer statements and if you're giving them any weight. The final thing I want to bring up, also related to this death scene in Rebirth, is what Cloud says to Aerith during his initial reaction to her being slain as he becomes overcome with emotion. Audrey reports that the Ultimania finally sheds light on a tie-in to the original game, where Nojima and Toriyama reveal that Cloud is saying the same lines as he did in the original during Rebirth's reconstruction of the scene, where Cloud is overcome with emotion as his lips reflect the lines, "My mouth is dry, my eyes are burning," from the original. While we can't hear him say that due to the static and distortion happening in Rebirth's rendition, Nomura stated that these lines Cloud mouthed were from the original game as a flashback. Flashback? Flashback to the original game, or a flashback to what actually happened moments prior and Cloud is just misinterpreting the events through his denial? Definitely let me know your thoughts about this in the comments, and to make things even more interesting, Cloud's English voice actor, Cody Christian, stated that the entire scene depicting Aerith's death was done, quote, all in one shot. Now, I've scoured the internet looking for concrete details of this, but I've seen numerous comments in my videos saying that Cody Christian voiced those lines from the OG that we just went over, with something about these lines being saved for the next game. If anyone can point me at that source, that would be much appreciated, and let us all know in the comments what was specifically said. But many are thinking, and rightly so, that a major part of Part 3, just like the original, is Cloud coming to terms with the events he's experienced and misinterpreted, and that these lines could be a way to highlight Cloud's ultimate acceptance of these events as he conquers the stages of grief. Absolutely insane stuff, I know, but definitely let me know what you all make of this in the comments below. Watch this video for a detailed look at what Part 3 may look like, with a deep dive into the game's map, regions, and story information, and stay tuned for more Final Fantasy content going forward. And I look forward to seeing all you good people real soon in the next one.